There is an ugly truth lurking in the history of pop music. A horrible reality that is often whispered about but rarely confronted head-on. It stands as a total embarrassment to fans of one of the most brilliant musical acts of the last 40 years. I am talking about the Pet Shop Boys. If you look at their career on a global scale, you see titans. They are the best-selling duo in the history of the British charts, widely revered as geniuses of electronic pop. But if you look at their career specifically in the United States, you see a tragedy. After exploding onto the scene as major hitmakers in the late 1980s, the Boys were almost systematically reduced to a hit-list cult band in America. While they remained massive stars everywhere else in the world, in the States, they vanished from the mainstream consciousness. How did this terrible thing happen? How does a group go from the top of the charts to virtually non-existent in the world's biggest music market? The answer is simple, yet devastating. Neil Tennant and Chris Lowe committed career suicide in the United States. Now, do not misunderstand me. I do not think they did anything morally wrong. I would not change a single thing about them or the typically British, ironic way they have handled their career. They are fantastic. But the harsh reality remains that as brilliant as they are, they doomed themselves in America. It was not a sudden accident. It didn't happen all at once in a single scandalous moment. Instead, it happened in stages, step by step, decision by decision. The American mass market is generally forgiving. They likely would have forgiven the Boys for 1, 2, or even 3 of these missteps. But taken all together, it spelled the end of their American dominance. I have broken this down into 10 distinct decisions. These are the specific choices that alienated the American public, confused the critics, and ultimately sealed their fate. From baffling album covers to misunderstood satire, and from refusing to play the rock star game to challenging the biggest bands in the world. These are the 10 things the Pet Shop Boys did to commit career suicide in the United States.
The first major crack in the foundation appeared almost immediately after their initial success. Following up on their massive #1 hit, West End Girls, the Pet Shop Boys released their second major single in the States, a track titled Opportunities, Let's Make Lots of Money. This song is absolutely crucial to understanding why the relationship between the band and America started to sour. I talk about this track at some length because it made much of the American public extremely suspicious of the Boys almost from the very beginning. You have to understand the mindset of the American music consumer in the mid-1980s. Pop stars in the United States are not supposed to be blatantly calculated or opportunistic. They're supposed to be passionate, authentic, and driven by art. When Neil Tennant sang the lyrics, "I've got the brains, you've got the looks, let's make lots of money," it sent a shiver down the spine of the American heartland. Now, you might be thinking, but Neil and Chris were not being themselves in that song. They were merely playing roles. And yes, you would be precisely right. It was a character study. But the mass of the American record-buying public is generally not looking for high-concept art when they turn on the radio. They were not sophisticated enough, or perhaps just not interested enough, to understand such concepts as a lyrical persona. In the United States, if you sing it, people assume you mean it. Furthermore, in Ronald Reagan's America, just as in Margaret Thatcher's Britain, the idea that a couple of guys could be so mercenary about pop stardom seemed downright realistic. It felt too close to the truth. While most members of the United States public do comprehend satire, they often do not perceive it when it is handled with such a high degree of subtlety. They understand Weird Al Yankovic because the joke is loud and obvious. But with Opportunities, many of them simply did not get the joke. They thought these two British guys were actually just arrogant capitalists. If that misunderstanding had been an isolated incident, they might have recovered. But they did not stop there. They doubled down on themes that alienated the average American male. Later, they released songs like Shopping and Rent. Even fewer people understood shopping than understood opportunities. A significant number of music critics in the States cited this track as evidence that the Boys were triviality incarnate. In the American rock ethos, stars are supposed to be deep and serious. They're certainly not supposed to be trivial. Besides, there was a gendered expectation at play here. In the 1980s, real men did not sing about shopping. Hell, they didn't even like to go shopping, much less sing an entire synth-pop anthem about it. Of course, the song Shopping is not actually about buying clothes. It is a critique of nationalized industries being sold off, but that nuance went right over most people's heads. Then you add the song Rent to the mix. This track is sung from the perspective of either a kept woman, according to Neil, or a rent boy, according to widespread interpretation. Regardless of which interpretation you choose, it does not play well in Peoria. It painted a picture of the band that was confusing, morally ambiguous, and starkly different from the earnest rock bands dominating the charts. But while the lyrics were causing confusion, the way they packaged their music was about to cause an even bigger problem. The boys were about to make a decision about a single word that would effectively alienate an entire demographic of music fans.
If the lyrics made people suspicious, the packaging of their music confirmed their worst fears. By the mid-1980s, disco had become a dirty word in America. You have to remember the cultural climate of the time. The disco sucks movement had done its damage. Even the artists who were still brave enough to continue making high-tempo electronic music were not calling it disco anymore. They had rebranded it as dance music or high-energy pop. It was the same sound, just a different label to avoid the stigma. But the Pet Shop Boys, being the stubborn contrarians they are, refused to play that game. They went ahead and titled their first remix album simply Disco. In the United States, this was practically an act of aggression. It was as if they were inviting the scorn of the rock-loving majority. They were waving a flag that most of America had already burned. That was strike two. But strike three was even more visual and arguably more damaging to their image as potential superstars. It came in the form of the cover art for their album Actually. I discussed this at length in my analysis of their discography because it is such a pivotal moment of disconnect. To summarize the problem simply, Americans do not like it when their stars yawn. In the United States, a celebrity is expected to be high energy, grateful, and excited to be entertaining you. The only time a star is allowed to yawn is if they are mocking something that is uncool. But on the cover of Actually, Neil Tennant is pictured yawning directly in the face of the consumer. It looked like he was bored by his own fame, or worse, bored by the people buying his record. To make matters worse, look at Chris Lowe in that same image. He is wearing an expression that sits somewhere halfway between a vacant blank stare and an angry scowl. And then there are the clothes. They are wearing tuxedos. In the American rock and roll playbook, stars do not wear tuxedos unless they are receiving an award from the president, and sometimes not even then. Rock stars wear leather, denim, or sweat-soaked t-shirts. They are supposed to look like they are working hard. The Pet Shop Boys looked like they were attending a boring dinner party that they desperately wanted to leave. It forced the average American viewer to ask, just what are these guys about anyway? The image projected an air of superiority and detachment that the United States market found impossible to embrace. But while the image was off-putting, the way they handled their next massive hit would turn that confusion into genuine anger.
While their image was confusing people, their business decisions began to actively frustrate the people who were actually trying to give them money. The Pet Shop Boys committed a cardinal sin with their next move, and it involved one of their most beloved tracks. They released a hit single that was not included on their current album. The song was their cover of Always on My Mind, and it was a massive smash hit in the United States. It was everywhere. Naturally, when a casual fan hears a song on the radio that they love, they go to the record store to buy the album, expecting to find that song on the track list. So people went out in droves to buy the album Actually, which had been released just a couple of months prior. They took it home, scanned the back cover, and realized with horror that Always on My Mind was nowhere to be found. This was a major source of frustration. In the United Kingdom, the non-album single is a common tradition, and fans are used to buying separate singles. But in the United States, the album is king. If you buy the big record, you expect the big hit to be on it. By separating the two, the boys created a disconnect. The United States record company knew this was a disaster in the making. They realized they were missing out on sales, so they panicked. They rush-released a special edition of Actually that featured a second disc containing the 12-inch single version of Always on My Mind. On paper, this sounded like a solution. In reality, it only exacerbated the situation. Think about the fans who had already bought the original version of Actually just a few weeks earlier. They now saw a new version on the shelf that included the song they wanted, but they were stuck with the inferior copy. They felt ripped off. They felt like the band and the record label were trying to squeeze them for double the money. The result was that nobody was happy. The new fans were confused, and the loyal fans felt cheated. It fueled the narrative that the Pet Shop Boys were tricky, unreliable, and perhaps a bit too focused on commerce over connection. But as bad as this retail confusion was, the band was about to release a music video that would practically banish them from the American mainstream for good.
Now we are really getting down to the core of the issue. The final days of the Pet Shop Boys' tenure as major United States hitmakers. If the previous decisions were cracks in the dam, this next moment was the flood. It centered around the music video for their single, Domino Dancing. By this point in the late 1980s, MTV was the absolute gatekeeper of American success. If you wanted to be a star, you had to survive the rotation on music television. The Domino Dancing video received a lot of airplay, but it brought something into living rooms across America that the bulk of their fan base was simply not ready to handle. On the surface, the video seems to tell a standard story of a love triangle involving two young men fighting over a woman. It had a heterosexual veneer. However, if you actually watch the camera work, a different story emerges. The video is saturated with blatant homoeroticism. The camera lingers on the two shirtless young men, positing them as the true sex objects of the film, far more than the girl who was their ostensible object of desire. In the macho, rock-dominated culture of the United States in 1988, this was jarring. American audiences were used to women being the visual candy, not men. Seeing two guys frolicking in the surf while the camera admired their physiques was just too much for the average male viewer in the Midwest to process comfortably. The reaction was almost palpable. It forced a question that many casual fans had been avoiding. Are these guys, you know? In Europe, this ambiguity was part of the allure. In the United States, it was a barrier to entry. Domino Dancing managed to become a United States top 20 hit for the boys, largely on the momentum of their previous success, but it would prove to be their last. They had drawn a visual line in the sand. By presenting themselves and their actors in this way, they filtered out the bro culture that had awkwardly bopped along to West End girls. They had refined their audience, but in doing so, they had significantly shrunk it. But if the video alienated the viewers, the format of their next album would baffle the listeners completely.
Neil Tennant himself has noted how the album Introspective was a major blow to their popularity in the United States. This might seem strange at first because, artistically speaking, it is a drop-dead brilliant record. Many hardcore fans consider it their masterpiece, but that is not the point. The problem lies in the specific expectations of the American music consumer. You see, when people in the United States go out to buy an album, they expect the songs on that disc to be pretty much exactly the same as the hit versions they heard playing on the radio. They want the 3-minute pop song they fell in love with during their morning commute. Now, long versions are okay as a bonus. In fact, United States consumers usually like it when the album version is considered the real version, and the hit single is just an edited, short version for the radio. But that is not what Introspective was all about. The Pet Shop Boys decided to flip the script entirely. The versions of the two major United States hits on that album, Always on My Mind and Domino Dancing, were not the unedited originals of the hit singles. Rather, they were drastically remixed extended dance tracks. From the perspective of the American consumer, the singles they heard on the radio were the real songs, and the tracks on the album sounded like self-indulgent club remixes. Instead of a tight 4-minute pop song, the listener was forced to sit through 8 or 9 minutes of house beats in repetitive loops. To the band, this was a clever subversion of the format. To the guy in Ohio who just wanted to sing along in his car, it was annoying.
The only song where the album version was the true original was Left to My Own Devices, but that track was never a major hit in the States anyway, so it didn't help matters. Since the greater mass of the United States record-buying public has very little use for extended dance remixes, Introspective proved to be highly detrimental to their standing in America. It reinforced the idea that this band was making music for nightclubs, not for the radio. And just as their sales were slipping, they decided to take a shot at the only band in the world that was actually bigger than them.
By this time, our heroes were unfortunately becoming virtual has-beens on the United States singles chart. They had lost the momentum. On the other hand, the Irish rock band U2 was at the absolute peak of their popularity in America. With the Joshua Tree, U2 had become treated almost like religious figures. They were earnest, serious, and deeply revered by the American public. And then along came Chris Lowe and Neil Tennant to treat these rock gods with what looked like total disrespect. They released the medley that combined U2's anthem Where the Streets Have No Name with the Frankie Valli classic Can't Take My Eyes Off You. To the boys, this was a brilliant piece of artistic commentary. They were taking a song about running away from the material world and mashing it up with a song about falling in love with a pretty face, all set to a high-energy disco beat. It was intended as a deconstruction and a demythologization of the rock anthem. But here is the problem. Who the hell knows or cares about deconstruction in the mainstream American market? To the average listener, it sounded like they were making fun of Bono. The guitarist for U2, The Edge, was even reported to have quipped, what have I done to deserve this?" referencing the Pet Shop Boys' own lyrics back at them. In Europe, the irony was applauded. In the United States, it was viewed as heresy. It confirmed what most of the United States record-buying public had long suspected about the boys, that they were not to be trusted. They were seen as too clever for their own good, willing to mock the very things that American music fans held sacred. By turning a serious rock anthem into a disposable dance track, they effectively severed the last thread connecting them to the rock-oriented listeners in the States. But while their records were alienating people, their absence from the physical stage was doing even more damage. While the records were causing controversy, the band was making a massive tactical error by simply not showing up. In the pre-internet era, touring was the lifeblood of a band's career. If you did not come to town and play your hits, you effectively did not exist. Chris and Neil did not go on a live concert tour in the United States until 1991. That is a lifetime in the pop music world. By the time they finally arrived, the peak of their fame had already passed, which probably did serious damage to their long-term American success. But the delay was only half the problem. The real issue was what happened when they actually got on stage. When they finally did tour in America with their performance stage show, they wanted it to be anything but your typical rock concert. They were bored by the standard setup. They wanted to do more than just stand up there and perform their songs, trying as best they could to replicate the sound of the records. They wanted high art, theater, and costume changes. Unfortunately, that is precisely the opposite of what most American concertgoers want and expect. In the States, a concert is a communal ritual where you go to see the band sweat, play their instruments, and look like real musicians. First, there was the delay, then the unexpected format. Once again, the original thing turned out to be the wrong thing by United States standards. The reaction was harsh. Incidentally, or perhaps not so incidentally, a reviewer for the New York Post infamously suggested that Radio City Music Hall needed to be fumigated following the performance show there. That quote really sums up the hostility they faced. It was a mix of prudery and humorlessness that is merely unfortunate on its own, but combined, it is lethal for a pop career. They had confused the audience one too many times. And finally, there was one last decision to be made, one that would close the door on their mainstream American career forever. The final nail in the coffin, though the body was arguably already pretty cold at this point, came shortly after the release of their album Very. From a personal perspective, it was undoubtedly the right thing to do. Neil Tennant made the brave decision to come out publicly as a gay man. He was finished with the ambiguity. He wanted to be honest with his fans and himself.
Многое из того, о чем я читал. When I was, a teenager in my 20s, I was bisexual in that I had sex with both men and women. After a while, I decided I preferred having sex with men.
But from a cold, hard business perspective, this was the moment that sealed the door on their American stardom. You have to look at this through the lens of the early 1990s. The cultural landscape was vastly different than it is today. In that specific era, you simply could not be a major, ongoing, mainstream star in the United States and be openly gay. There was an unwritten rule in the American music industry. You could be gay, and in the closet, certainly. Or you could be open about it and achieve limited success as a flash in the pan or a recurring character actor. But to be a top-tier idol, the kind that sells out stadiums and dominates top 40 radio for decades, it was virtually impossible. The only exception was perhaps Elton John, but by the 90s, even he had transitioned into a legacy act rather than a current chart topper. The United States mass market was not ready to accept a romantic pop idol who was openly singing to another man. When Neil came out, it regrettably but instantly pegged the Pet Shop Boys as a gay group in the eyes of the American general public. Once that label is applied in a conservative market, you become, more or less by definition, a cult band. You are placed in a niche. The mainstream radio stations stop playing your new singles because they fear alienating their core demographic. It is a terrible reality, and fortunately, that now appears to be changing for the better in the modern music industry. But that change arrived 2 decades too late for the Pet Shop Boys. By the time the culture caught up, ageism became their bigger obstacle. Neil's honesty was a personal triumph, but it was the final step that ensured they would never again reach the dizzying heights of West End girls in America.
And that is how the Pet Shop Boys went from being major hitmakers to a hitless cult band in the United States in 10 easy steps. It is a fascinating case study in the clash of cultures. On one side, you had the British sensibility of irony, artifice, and detachment. On the other side, you had the American demand for authenticity, earnestness, and traditional rock values. When these two forces collided, something had to give. The Pet Shop Boys refused to change who they were to suit the market. They refused to smile for the cameras, they refused to simplify their lyrics, and they refused to pretend to be something they were not. In the end, while it may look like a failure on the charts, you could argue it was actually a triumph of integrity. America's loss was the rest of the world's gain. The United States mass market might have moved on, but the fans who stayed were treated to decades of uncompromising, brilliant music that never pandered to the lowest common denominator. They committed career suicide in terms of sales, but they kept their souls alive. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of pop culture and want to hear more ugly truths about your favorite stars, make sure to hit that subscribe button for Retro Celeb Talk. We are digging up the stories that nobody else dares to talk about. Let me know in the comments. Do you think the Pet Shop Boys should have changed their style to please America, or were they right to stay true to themselves? Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.